Over the years, I've done almost every performance-enhancing drug there is, and these are my 4 biggest regrets. This video will help you to not make the dumb mistakes that I did, and I'll tell you what I'd do differently if I could go back. I started working out when I was around 19, and I was coming out of a pretty serious eating disorder. At 5'11", I was 135 pounds. After 5 years of eating and training, I'd gained about 50 pounds, and I was sitting at 185, which, that's a significant amount of weight, but I still didn't look like the guys in the magazines. And shit, I know this dates me, so just to give you a little history lesson for those of you who don't know what magazines are. They're these things that are similar to books, and you may not have heard of those either, but they were essentially paper, the stuff that was made from trees that had ink on it. There was pictures, and bodybuilders used to go in there and put their pictures on. They'd be sold at the store. There wasn't social media, really. Instagram didn't exist. There was only 1 or 2 YouTube influencers. They weren't even called influencers then. They were just YouTube fitness channels. And then there was MySpace, and you didn't really take shirtless pictures on MySpace. We worried a lot more about our top friend list and editing a song onto your profile. And I know you guys will have no idea what I'm talking about, but you old folks out there will get where I'm coming from. Anyway, I didn't look like my favorite pro bodybuilder. And to put it in terms you may understand, I didn't look like your favorite Instagram influencer. I thought I'd reached my genetic potential. I hadn't. So around the age of 23 or 24, I hopped on my first cycle of steroids, and if I could go back, I would have waited much longer. To be honest, I was super disappointed with the results that I got, and that was because I simply didn't understand the fundamentals of nutrition and training. Had I learned to fully maximize my full potential first, and then add in anabolics, my body would have flourished, and I would have had much better gains than I did. And to be honest, for years, I continued to just add in more drugs and leave my training and nutrition how it was, and I had lackluster results. Sure, I look better than 98% of the population, but there are natural guys out there that looked better than me. And I quickly realized that it wasn't the drugs that made the guys in the magazines or the guys on Instagram look the way that they do. It's the genetics, the training, the nutrition, it's everything else, and the drugs are just that cherry on top. So my advice to you is wait until you've maximized all the other variables before ever considering any steroids or performance-enhancing drugs. Starting the doses too high. So back in the day of those things called magazines and MySpace, there was no more plates, more dates, or Vigorous Steve telling us how to do these things safely and intelligently. What we relied on was these obscure back alley forums that were kind of hard to find and loaded with idiots who, looking back, probably suffered from a little bit of neurodegeneration due to using the absurd amount of gear that they were recommending. In that day, first cycle gold standard was always 500 milligrams of testosterone and anthate divided into 2 injections, always Monday and Thursday. And they told you to kickstart it with D-bol. What this got you was bloated as hell, acne, insomnia, test flu. And because you felt like shit half the time, you hardly made any gains because you could barely even train. So what do I do if I could go back is, well, first thing I would get labs and check to see where my testosterone even was at some place like Merrick Health using code ATLAS. If I actually needed to increase my testosterone, I would start at a much lower dose. I would likely start somewhere around 200 or 250 milligrams a week, and I would have divided that into multiple injections, at least 3. Then I would get the most out of that for as long as possible before ever moving up. What happens when you start at 500 is you have nowhere to go. What's your next cycle? 750? So that means your third cycle, you're already at a gram of testosterone? Starting that high makes your ceiling for progression extremely low. Starting lower gives you a long time to titrate up, and you can truly get a sense of what your body feels like on testosterone. I also would have never added any D-bol or any orals because truly there's simply not a need for them, especially in a recreational lifter. Managing blood pressure. Now those same exact forums where we got all of this terrible information used to tell us that blood pressure really didn't matter because blood pressure was only transiently elevated while you were on your cycle and it would come down, so don't even worry about it. The problem is most of us, like I did, continued on cycle. We never got off because this shit's terribly addicting. Once you start, you feel like you'll never be able to make gains without it, and so most of us just stayed on doing blasting and cruising, and testosterone in any form will likely increase what's called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system and to some extent raise your blood pressure. Couple that with all the heavy lifting we're doing and all the weight that we're carrying around, most of us will have elevated blood pressure. Now we know that anything over 120 over 80 is causing endothelial damage, it's causing organ strain, it's causing neurodegeneration. And so for years I walked around with this deleterious effect on my health without even knowing it. If I could go back, I would have monitored my blood pressure from day 1 and likely implemented a blood pressure medication early on. Lipid management. I bet you guessed it, the forums also told us that we probably didn't need to worry about lipid management. Some guys would tell you to take more fish oil or maybe implement some red yeast rice if you were taking drugs like Winstrol, but all in all, most people they didn't really talk about lipids at all. We know that atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, or ASCVD for short, is the leading killer of all people. Black, white, Mexican, female, male, whatever you decide to call yourself. We also know that ApoB containing particles like VLDL and LDL are a causative factor of that ASCVD. And many of these drugs that we take will lower the HDL-C and increase these ApoB containing particles. Looking back, I would have monitored these levels a lot closer, and I would have implemented something like ezetimibe or rosuvastatin or a combination of the two anytime that my levels were getting out of range. And as a bonus, looking back, instead of ever doing steroids, I would have just gone to gorillamind.com/atlas and used some gorilla supplements, which are way safer and way more effective than any steroid out there. No, I'm kidding, I'm full of shit, but still go there, use code ATLAS, and I will see you guys in the next one.